Hollywood writers and studios have reached a tentative deal to end a nearly 5-month-long strike, but no deal is yet in the works for industry actors. As for the Writers Guild agreement, the Writers Guild of America West wrote on Twitter, the WGA and AMPTP have reached a tentative agreement. This was made possible by the enduring solidarity of WGA members and extraordinary support of our union siblings who stood with us for over 146 days. More details coming after contract language is finalized.
According to a new Reuters Ipsos poll, Americans broadly support the current Hollywood and auto workers strikes. 58% of Americans support the first ever simultaneous strike by the United Auto Workers Union against Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis, and 60% of Americans support the strike by screenwriters and actors for better pay and protections, Reuters writes. Here's what a Fox News panel recently had to say about the UAW strike.
The UAW, the auto workers, including benefits, currently make $65 an hour. That is $20 more per hour than Tesla and $10 more per hour than people who work for, say, Toyota and Honda in the United States. Shawn Fain's original offer to the Detroit Three would have put them, including benefits, at $150 an hour. And Charles, I just want to remind, in terms of if you're feeling sorry for, say, people who work at General Motors, after the American people bailed out General Motors and Chrysler for $80 billion, General Motors still owes the American people $11 billion. The union workers at GM who were there then, the existing workers, did not take a pay cut.
Right.
They never took a pay cut. So where's our money, you workers?
I still think that's a beef with the management, not the workers.
Joining us now to discuss is staff writer at the Jacobin, Alex Press. Alex, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, Alex, I want to just jump in quickly here. Charles was saying something towards the end that it's an issue with the management and not the writers. Would you agree with that?
You mean not the auto workers,
or the
right?
auto workers, correct.
UAW,
yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the auto workers maybe at GM did not take a pay cut, but real wages are down across all three companies. And, you know, Shawn Fain, the newly elected president of the UAW, has been very clear and I think really good on this. He says the companies own all of this, all of the disruption, all of the bailout costs. The companies own all of it. Why does he say that? Well, these executives, their pay is up 40% over the past few years. Prices for autos for consumers are up something like 35%. Workers' wages, they're up maybe 5% over the past decade. So that extra cost, whether we're talking about at the consumer end or we're talking about bailouts, these workers are not responsible for that. That money is going straight into the CEO's pockets. It's going straight into the investor class through stock buybacks and other kind of pay incentives. And if we want to point a finger at anyone, I think, you know, you don't have to be a full-throated supporter of workers, though I believe you should be, to understand who is at fault here. And I think even as we saw, some of the Fox people themselves even understand that it's not the workers to blame.
So, Alex, that's interesting that you raised a 40% pay increase for the CEOs. A few days ago, the CEO of GM was asked that exact same question. And she said, well, it's because of a performance bonus. 92% of that pay increase was because of a performance bonus. There's no way we could pay workers what they're asking for. If we did, we would have to close down plants and we would also have to let go thousands and thousands of employees. What's your take on that?
I mean, again, to be clear, what is she talking about? She can't take a several $million-dollar pay cut and give it to workers. I mean, this is one pot of money here. She is getting a performance bonus. One, sounds like she's not performing very well if they can't afford to pay living wages to their workers without shutting down the plants. Two, if she is really concerned about this company and these workers, then I think she can survive on a wage a little closer to what her workers make rather than 400 times what they make. So I think this is, from the jump, it is just completely a lie. Shawn Fain says every word out of the CEO's mouths is a lie. And, you know, I think in this case, again and again, that's being proven true.
Yeah, I remember there was a statistic going around last week. I don't know if it was from Shawn Fain, who was pointing out that if you look at what the profits for this year to date, not even for the full 2023 cycle of the big three, were that you could actually double all of the employee salaries and still have a lot of profits to spare for the company. Additionally, my understanding to Shermichael's earlier question was that back in 2008, there may or may not have been actual cuts to salary, but the workers themselves made a lot of concessions in their contract, including giving up a lot of their pension rights. So to frame it as the workers didn't take a hit and it was only the American taxpayer that were bailing people out as opposed to the workers themselves who were willing to say, okay, we'll do what needs to be done to keep these plants open, seems to be a little bit of a misrepresentation. No?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really important point. One of the big things that a lot of people are familiar with is that these workers gave up cost of living allowances. So that means they are not getting raises to meet inflation. They also, as you mentioned, a lot of these newer workers don't have pensions. They don't have decent health care upon retirement as their bodies are broken down and destroyed by these jobs. These are not easy jobs. I think everyone knows that. It is very normal for an aging auto worker to have numerous health problems, and then they're just discarded upon retirement and no longer with the care and pensions that they need to survive. You know, that's just a few of the things. There's also the introduction of a tier. I think it's worth explaining to viewers what a tier in a contract is, which is you have a worker who's newer hire, working beside more senior workers, making far less money per hour without the benefits, without all of these things that built these jobs into being famously decent jobs that don't require college degrees. And what do you think that does for solidarity in the plant and for the existence of the union? When one worker is making, say, half of what his coworker is doing for the same work, it's completely toxic, and it's impossible for a union to subsist on that. So that's another thing that came out of these bailouts and these concessions. Now, the companies had always said, when we're profitable, we will give those things back. They lied. So the workers are taking it back.
Alex, I want to ask you to update us on what's going on with the new writer strike news. I know it's just a tentative agreement and a lot of details aren't yet out yet, but what do we know or what can we anticipate about the terms of this agreement? And maybe you can remind us a little bit about what the main concerns were for the writers on strike.
Yeah, so the writers on strike had a whole bunch of concerns that I'm sure people have heard about over the many months they've been on strike. You know, they need pay raises. They, just like everyone else, have been subject to the loss of real wages. You know, wages are down something like 20% over the past decade for the average writer. They want new residuals because it used to be that way, say, when the writer of Seinfeld, when that reran on television, on linear network television, they got a residual. That was a payment that often got them through that year because it's very hard to work full year round in this industry. No one does it, right? You can't get gigs year round. And so those residuals would tide workers over through the droughts. Now with Netflix, you know, there's no such thing as a rerun. We all know you can watch Seinfeld indefinitely if you wanted to. So these workers are not getting any money, no matter how successful their shows. And it has really led to a massive decrease in their average wages. Those are just a couple things. I mean, artificial intelligence regulations is a big one. You know, minimum staffing for writers' rooms and minimum length of contracts is another. You know, there's so many here because this is really about an industry that has fundamentally changed with the rise of streaming, with Netflix, with all of these things that people subscribe to, and you can't remember your login. It's so inefficient, and it has been terrible for the workers. It has only been good for a few of the people at the top. And you know how contracts work with unions. It's only every few years. And certainly during COVID, a lot of unions kind of put off this sort of final standoff because workers weren't there. They were disorganized. Everyone was remote or otherwise scattered. So this is a long time coming, right? There's a lot to rectify. And these workers, it's why they struck for, you know, almost 150 days now. And we don't know what's in the tentative agreement. You know, it's been described as having significant raises. They'd already won a fair amount, you know, over the past few months. But they were holding out for more because they know this is, you know, in the language that writers have said to me again and again, this is an existential question about the future of the industry. And they're not willing to cave just because they won one or two things. So we'll see. I mean, I've heard there's new requirements on the minimum number of writers in a writer's room. I've heard that the raises are significant. The AI regulations are significant. But right now, the bargaining committee of this union is respecting the press blackout, because their focus right now is just making sure the membership knows first. And I think that's a really good thing. You know, I often say that unions are the last democratic institution the working class in this country actually has. It's theirs to control. Their leaders are elected by them, and they're going to go through the process. So we'll see that leadership vote and discuss this contract over the next couple of days. And if they think it's good enough, they will then hand it to the members to vote on whether to ratify it or not.
I mean, Alex, you know what's fascinating about this to me is Democrats, Republican voters appear to be on one accord as it pertains to this particular issue. Despite hyperpartisanship, tribalism has sort of segmented us. But yet, as we continue to see wealth inequality spread, more and more Americans are starting to singularly focus on this particular issue. You have inflation increasing right now. Wages haven't increased with inflation. Where do you ultimately see this going, Alex? Not just with these two instances, but in the long term. I'm talking 5 or 10 years from now. Do you see at some point where Americans sort of come together to say, we have enough. We need to make more to take care of ourselves and our families?
I mean, I certainly hope so, right? I mean, I think, my connection may be a little unstable. Apologies to everyone. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a long cycle, right? We saw Sanders' campaign peak in 2020. We saw these Black Lives Matter protests, uprisings. We saw young people basically being introduced to the language of class politics and really a sense that inequality is not going to be solved by whoever you elect at the top. The state is far too captured by the capitalist class in this country and their sort of, stooges in Congress. And it takes actual exercise of power in your workplace, in your tenant organization, in your community to wrest that, to extract that power back. The tight labor market right now is contributing to why we're seeing these strikes and these new unions. And my hope is that they generate the momentum that's required to actually, sort of reverse the trends we've seen. This is all exciting. These are major historic strikes we're seeing, but the unionization rate is still low. And yet the majority of workers not only support these strikes, but say that if they could join a union, they would. Now, the problem is they still can't. Labor law is incredibly pro-employer here. It's very hard to organize a union. It's very hard to wage a successful strike. And so I think what we have to see is as these movements and these strikes go from victory to victory, they also then get the elected officials to start changing the laws to make things fairer and on an even playing field. So when you talk about 5, 10, 20 years, well, it's a question of, does that cycle start picking up? Does this feedback loop start? And if we get that, I think we get the sort of change that we actually so desperately need. And that people on the general basis, not elected politicians, not commentators, but the average person absolutely fundamentally knows and wants, which is that there is more than enough to go around. There's just a matter of how to get it.
Alex, speaking of corporate capture at the top, Joe Biden made news by announcing that he planned to join the picket line. Donald Trump plans to head to Detroit to do some counter-programming, an event that's not on the picket line, but which will happen at the same time as the Republican debate. Cornel West, running on the Green Party ticket, has indicated that he plans to go, and Marianne Williamson has also indicated that she plans to go and join the auto workers on the picket line this week. What do you make of the news that Joe Biden is going, and does this bolster his characterization of himself as the most pro-union candidate of all time?
I mean, I think it's a great win for the union. The UAW has said, and it's the new UAW, which again, people should know this is a new leadership elected in the first democratic elections in the UAW's history, right? This was a massive win for reformers, rank and file members who wanted a more democratic, small d democratic union, right? And they won, and now they're approaching politicians like Joe Biden, not with deference, but with militancy. They have said, hey, if you want to come support us on the picket line and be in solidarity, anyone is welcome, right? And so I think the Biden administration was sort of shocked by that, and it's a huge win that they think it's necessary to do so, and that Biden will be joining them. I do want to say, as far as Donald Trump here, President Sean Fain has been very clear. He is a working class leader. He put out a statement saying everything this union is doing right now, everything this strike is about, is against the billionaires and the millionaires who we do not elect to solve our problems. They cannot solve working class problems. They don't understand living to paycheck. So there was no uncertain terms here. He has no interest in Donald Trump because Donald Trump has no interest in working class people. Even this event he's doing, it's not some sort of sanctioned UAW event. I've yet to find which workers he's actually speaking to. He's just going to Detroit. I'm sure he will find a worker there to listen to him. So I just want to be clear here about, the UAW has said anyone is welcome. I can't imagine we're going to see Donald Trump on a picket line, though.
Thank you so much, Alex. This has been really informative. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks for having me.